So we previously released a video that was a response to a news article that dug up some information that Cyclops was the direct descendant of ancient Egyptian pharaohs. An Uncanny X-Men 54 written by Arnold Drake. And we didn't interpret that fact. We thought Jonathan Hickman retconned Cyclops' history to include that with his new X-Men run. So we thought that Jonathan Hickman put that in place. Turns out that it was Arnold Drake who wrote this, not Chris Claremont or Stan Lee. This appears to be in that time when the X-Men was dying and was in due for cancellation until Giant Size X-Men. So the Living Pharaoh basically kidnapped Havoc, and the reason that he kidnapped Havoc and was having some beef with the Summers family was that have direct connection to the Egyptian pharaohs. And the Living Pharaoh, who's the villain of this issue, is white, by the way. You can tell that it's pretty dated. And he basically stated that Cyclops and the Summers bloodline is connected to ancient Egyptian pharaohs. And so this seemed to be pretty much a story, a background story of Cyclops that was forgotten about in time.
I wonder why.
Yeah, I wonder why. So this was a story that was forgotten about, was never really to be brought up again, wasn't really considered canon, or if it was not marketed to be canon. So we got the facts wrong on that, but we still have an issue going on with this kind of storytelling, even if it was written in 1969, with the direction that Cyclops have had since then. Just having X-Men characters who are white leading the X-Men in storylines that borrow heavily based on real life history and real life events that happen and occur to Black people in America.
Oh man. All right. Well, first and foremost, like you were saying, in the interest of keeping our platform, there's no issue with acknowledging that the prior video we had addressing this topic is no longer on the YouTube channel, and that certain criticisms of the writer and the material may have been unwarranted. However, that being said, I still think that there's some bullshit going on. I still think that there are some things in play that don't necessarily sit right. For starters, there's a reason why this storyline or this supposed part of the origin or bloodline for that character, there's a reason why that shit got discarded long ago. And throughout the entire X-Men run post Giant Size X-Men, this has never been addressed at all to my knowledge. And if it has, I'm sure there's somebody out there that can point it out. But to my knowledge, throughout an entire run of a popular animated series, throughout an entire run of well-known movies attached to the property of X-Men, it was never addressed. Throughout two different continuities and two different characters, meaning his brother and Cyclops live action. This was never a trait or a part of that character's backstory that got any kind of light across multiple popular platforms when the X-Men was at its peak throughout the 90s and early 2000s. So while we may have been wrong to criticize and jump out of the window a little bit by getting at Jonathan Hickman and some of the things that we said in that prior video, my stance on it does not change because it feels like this is still kind of something that they're drawing on. Even though this is in that character's deep, dark past, it's still something that's being drawn on, in my opinion, for shock value, but not necessarily a means to advance the medium or actually give the reader something to think about. That's my opinion on that. I still don't need Cyclops to be a descendant of ancient pharaohs. I still don't need that. I got to plant my feet on that firmly. I do not need I do not need Cyclops to be descendant from ancient pharaohs. I said that the second time I said that. Last time, I hope I got to say it.
It's just a history, man, when it comes to the X-Men of they have a diverse cast, but ultimately they don't have characters of color leading the X-Men or leading storylines that involve the X-Men. Let's just be real. Storm led the X-Men for quite a bit. Storm is pretty much your number two character when it comes to leading the X-Men besides Cyclops. She held it down in the 80s, and then after Cyclops got back his edge and became the leader again, it's been pretty much abysmal. I mentioned before in the previous video, Brian Michael Bendis' run of Uncanny X-Men, where Cyclops took a turn and became a mutant revolutionist. And he had a mutant revolution where he was really speaking it almost like he was just paraphrasing Malcolm X, but replaced black people with mutants. He had kids doing the Wakanda salute. He was doing the Wakanda salute, the X, arms forming the X. You had the Cyclops was right t-shirts, the Cyclops was right signs. You got him basically alluding that the Avengers are like the police, not caring about mutants and mutant issues. Basically, it's this fine line with the X-Men where, on one hand, yes, they are preaching about diversity and being different, and whether that be race, sexual orientation, gender, or whatever. But on the other hand, their stories don't really live up to that.
Right.
Their stories don't live up to that in terms of the representation of who's leading the charge, who's leading the cause here, who's got the fist up, who's putting the plan into action to get the mission done. And it's not characters of color that are accomplishing this. It's usually Charles, Eric, Cyclops, Jean, Wolverine. For the entire history of the X-Men, there has never really, I can't really recall, besides Bishop and Storm having some kind of big impact on the team, on storyline.
As far as like dressing discrimination.
Right. And I mentioned previously before that Storm should have been the one with the fist up leading the mutant revolution, not Cyclops. Storm being an African woman who must have seen that racism in full effect. And I mean, she's not only just a mutant, she's a black woman as well. So that's two right there. That's two for her that would handicap her in the scale of society. So for Cyclops to kind of come out with this raw energy of being a revolutionary when he's basically an Alaskan kid, kind of lived a sheltered life where Charles pretty much hid him from the real ugly truths and the real ugly dangers of the world and society. I wouldn't say he wasn't affected by it, but he really didn't feel the full gravity of being a minority and being a mutant as compared to a character like Storm or a character even like Nightcrawler who's freaking blue. Looks like a freaking devil.
Yep, I agree with you. Because it's already implied, at least in my opinion, it's already implied to me that the mutant struggle in these stories has to be an allegory to minorities. It has to be. There's no other way for me as a minority to view it. There's no other way for me to perceive it because of real world experience. I think that for a time it was okay to have characters who weren't, people of color kind of, being the main players in these storylines. But without being overly woke or virtue signaling, as the new term is, coined, I do think that after a certain point in time, either you got to commit to taking the risk or pretend that it's not there. Either you continue going along the same lines of telling these stories, or if you're going to go in a different direction with it, commit to going in that direction. I still feel as though it's playing it too safe to have a character like Cyclops basically trying to be this unifying radical figure for mutants and talking about discrimination and talking about the struggles that people are facing because they're different. Because for a character like that, if he's not wearing his visor, if Cyclops is just walking around with a pair of sunglasses on and a sweater or a jacket, That's a regular looking guy, right? That's a
Right.
regular looking guy. There's nothing that sets him apart to identify him as being a mutant. I get what they're trying to do. They're trying to give a new coat of paint to the X-Men in relation to whatever, right? Whatever's going
Right.
on over at Marvel Comics. But the thing that drew me to X-Men, the reason why I'm still a fan, the reason why I'm going to guess that you're still a fan, is because that's one of the few comic book superhero related properties that I feel like actually has that space to transcend the entire medium through whatever messages that they are trying to convey, right? That's how I feel
Right.
about it. I still feel that way about it. But part of it that's bullshit to me is you can't half step. You can't pretend to be trying to do something and then not do it just for the sake of trying to appear that you're doing something different. Like, okay, and this might even be a reach, but I don't want to feel as though my time and my intelligence are being insulted. I don't want to feel like I'm being taken for granted because I can identify with some of the subject matter. And because I can identify with it, you draw me in. Then once you get me in the door, you coming at me with Cyclops as, the new leader of the movement, huh? So he's the one, like, so Cyclops is supposed to be the mutant Marcus Garvey. Is that what we're doing? So I'm not feeling that. And I mean, we discussed this in the other video in terms of how you feel about this current run. So do your feelings about this current run change, even though we've acknowledged that Jonathan Hickman isn't responsible for this supposed origin? Do you still feel the same?
Do I still feel the same way as I did making that first video? My feelings have changed. With the new run, the latest issues is kind of connecting the dots that mutants all derived from basically Egypt and Apocalypse. Have an Egyptian mutant, have an Egyptian origin. So, with that, why isn't that represented in the mutant character roster, where you have majority of them are Caucasian or white. Very few of them are actually black or Middle Eastern or Hispanic, or there's more blue. There's more blue X-Men than they are any
Oh
other
man.
color.
Oh,
Uh,
interesting.
so, I mean, if that's the case, then still there's that teeter-tottering of what makes us special with our history and our background being transferred over to a majority white cast of characters, and then them taking that history and taking our history and real life problems, and then basically making that entertaining and making that's comfortable for someone to cheer them on for. Anyway, you have the X-Men has been borrowing real life history like the Tuskegee experiments and the massacre of Black Wall Street and etc. And borrowing these stories and these elements, and now kind of culturally with this Egyptian background or history to their cast,
Yep.
and we're not being properly represented in that storyline of leading that charge or making a real difference in any of these storylines where you could say like, oh yeah, he was a key player in that and in beating such and such villain instead of just being a background space filler. No dialogue, no nothing, just like, oh yeah, they're there, he's there, he's
Yep.
in the background right over there in the
Yep.
back.
Yep.
Third, fourth string X-Men. Cool.
Yep. But
And it's not cool anymore.
right, and because they're in the panel, that means that that's inclusion. Man, listen. All right. Listen, man. I agree with you. And
Ooh.
see, because this is where things get a little bit murky for me.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And even just looking at it past X-Men, right? Some of the issues that I have with a lot of popular media and a lot of things that get portrayed are exactly the things that you mentioned here, right? Like, why does the attention grabber, why does the thing that gets the attention of me as a person of color, as a black man, as somebody who understands the way that things work in America? Why is it that in order to draw me in as a consumer to be interested in the product, it always has to stem or draw from pain? It always has to stem from a real issue that people who look like us face in America. But then once you get me in the door, we're not even on that same level anymore. You get me in the door, and then it's almost like you got me in the door in order to take me into a different direction. Like, I came in the door, I thought we were going into the kitchen, but instead you're leading me to the left into the closet, right? I'm being led into the dark hallway, even though I thought I was going into the kitchen. And the issue that I have with a lot of popular media is that I feel like we are the only people who are drawn in to consume in that way. I don't feel as though the focus to get consumers of other backgrounds is as intense as it is for us. I can't speak to why, because I'm that's over my head, but I definitely feel as though there's a little bit of smoke that leads to fire in relation to what it is that I'm speaking on. I don't want to get too far into it, but I definitely feel like the scales aren't balanced in a way that they should be.
I hear that Storm is supposed to get a bigger push next year. I mean, we'll see. We'll see if they can deliver on that.
Thing
Yep.
is, we can go on all day.
We can.
We literally could go on all day in relation to some of these things. But for the sake of keeping this platform, enjoyable, entertaining, light, serious, for the sake of balance on this platform, sometimes we are going to get into these type of conversations.
To our listeners out there, we want to hear what you have to say about this. Does the X-Men books borrow too heavily from real-life discrimination without proper representation? Comment below and let us know what you think. Also, if you're feeling that content, hit the subscribe button, and thanks again for listening to another episode of Behind the Scene Podcast.